Children are bearing the heaviest burden of this economic crisis caused by the war in Ukraine. Those words coming from the UNICEF, which found that the war has plunged 4 million more children into poverty. UNICEF Deputy Regional Director Philippe Cori joins us now from Geneva, Switzerland. Philippe, thank you so much for joining us. What has led to child poverty soaring by almost 20% across Eastern Europe and Central Asia?
Simply, the war, this nonsense war. We were expecting, it's a region of, 105 million children. They represent 25% of the population of that region, made of 22 countries, and they are affected by poverty by 40%. So they are 40% of the new poor. There are 10 million new poor because of this shrinking of the economy, of the shock that this war is creating, the loss of jobs, the loss of opportunities, the shrinking of markets, and families are losing in the region their income. And Russia is particularly affected with 2.8 million children out of the 4 million children new poor that you mentioned because of this war. So this war is really not only killing children, injuring children, but also pushing them into poverty.
It is truly concerning, Philippe, that children are bearing the heaviest burden of this economic crisis caused by the war in Ukraine. If you break down the numbers, you already mentioned Russia and Ukraine. Which other nations are the hardest hit?
I think the hardest hit first is Russia, and then you have obviously Ukraine with 500,000 children, but then all around the region and beyond, because the indirect cost of food and fuel that has affected other regions in Africa, in Asia, is also having this long-lasting effect on families and making also new challenges for their accesses to normal growth and to normal basic services because of the price index. So there is also a correlation in this model that we have worked on to demonstrate that this is, affecting particularly children and that this war should stop.
And Philippe, how is UNICEF coming up with solutions or stopgap measures as we at this point see no end in sight to the Ukraine war amid rising inflation, which is here to stay for a while?
No, definitely. So this is something that is taking its toll, and we are quite pessimistic, unfortunately. But we need to spare no efforts to mitigate this negative impact on children in terms of their access to services, health, education, social protection, also for pregnant women, for mothers to be protected from this negative impact of the war. So one first thing that countries can do is really social protection systems targeting families with children with disabilities, the poorest household, obviously, so that these children do not stay poor and then get trapped in poverty all their life. So we know it's very much important to, at this point in time, target with social protection scheme cash transfer to prevent the negative impact that would really get them trapped, in poverty for all their life. This infernal cycle of intergenerational poverty is something that we need to break. So it's extremely important that these policies be made in place, that the social protection schemes at government level, municipality level, engage proactively to prevent this long-lasting impact of child poverty in their countries.
Because, Philippe, if you don't support these children and the families now, the steep rise in child poverty will almost certainly result in the medium to long term lost lives, number two, lost learning, and lost futures.
Exactly, you are very right. Already we consider that we will have 4,000 deaths that could have been prevented above the normal rate of child mortality before the age of 1 year. At the same time, we have lost potentially more than 110 years of learning, which is basically one child out of 100,000, two child actually, out of 110,000 kids not going to school for all the childhood and having no access to learning and education, therefore having no chance to get out of poverty.
And of course, child poverty, Philippe, also goes far beyond the financial difficulties of families. This also has a domino effect. Without money, health, and education, this leaves children as well, vulnerable to violence, exploitation, and abuse.
Exactly, and this is really where we try to help working governments and partners, municipalities, civil societies. We need to prevent this to happen. You know, on the long run, it's a cancer in our societies that destroy ultimately the social cohesion of our communities and just continue to nurture violence and ultimately war in the world.
And how is the United Nations and UNICEF assisting refugees who want to flee this war in Ukraine, Philippe?
So we have, since the war is taking place mainly in Ukraine and neighboring countries, refugees are going to EU countries, and we are working with these governments to host these families, to give them access to learning, to protection, to provide psychosocial support. We work a lot with municipalities. Municipalities are a key player in providing the services, so helping them scaling up their services for education. They need learning space. They have so many children coming in. One has to remember that the first 20 days of this tragedy, we have seen more than, in terms of comparing refugees than in 4 years of the Syrian war, only in 20 days. So all these cities had to really scale up their system, also preventing and mitigating, potential situation of trafficking. Unfortunately, in these moments, you have all this kind of trafficking also at play. It's very important that you ensure a whole society approach around protecting these children from trafficking, starting by training the border control staff by recognizing potential situation of trafficking, not just controlling passports, or the municipal police, or helping the government or the cities to hire more teachers for preschool, so that families be stabilized and children safe, so that mothers could enroll children for health services, for education, and social protection schemes. So it's really about, we try to have systems in place since we're in the EU, so that they be scaled up, they could sustain the magnitude of these refugees in terms of protecting these children. Because basically 90% of these millions of refugees that are now in Europe are children and their families, and their mothers in particular.
UNICEF Deputy Regional Director Philippe Cori joining us from Geneva, Switzerland. Thank you so much for joining us.